All right, welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where well, the idea is we help you get smart fast.
Mm-hmm.
We take these complex topics and we really dive deep into them. Today's topic is something that I think touches pretty much everybody,
Yeah.
and that's weight loss.
Yeah.
Everyone's always looking for the best way to lose weight, the most effective way to lose weight,
Mm-hmm.
and we got a really interesting suggestion from one of our listeners.
Okay.
They sent us excerpts from the Obesity Code by Dr. Jason Fung.
Ah, very interesting.
Yeah, and this book kind of throws a curveball at a lot of the conventional thinking about weight loss.
It does. It really challenges the status quo.
Yeah, and that's what we love to do here on the Deep Dive.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be using these excerpts from Dr. Fung's book as our primary source today.
Sound good.
And our mission today is to really distill what Dr. Fung is saying.
Okay.
What are his core ideas? Why does he think the standard approaches to weight loss aren't working? And what does he propose as a better way to understand it?
That's a great plan because he definitely has some strong opinions about why the typical advice just doesn't seem to cut it for so many people.
Yeah, I mean, if the old advice worked, we wouldn't have this obesity epidemic that we seem to be facing.
Right, exactly.
So we're going to try to pull out those key insights and really help you understand Dr. Fung's perspective.
I think our listeners are really going to get a lot out of this because he brings up some surprising points that might totally change how they think about weight loss.
Definitely. All right, so let's jump right into it.
Okay.
One of the first things that Dr. Fung really challenges is this idea of calories in, calories out.
Yes.
For years, we've been told that weight loss is all about this simple equation.
Right. Eat less, move more, and the pounds will melt away.
Right, but Dr. Fung points to some pretty compelling evidence that that might not be the whole story.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that if that were true, if it were really that simple, we wouldn't be seeing the obesity rates we're seeing today.
Right.
He uses the example of Canada. Between 1985 and 2011, their obesity rates actually tripled.
Wow.
And this was during a time when, the official dietary advice was all about low-fat, calorie-reduced diets.
So people were supposedly following the advice, but it wasn't having the desired effect.
Exactly. So that kind of disconnect should make us question whether calories in, calories out is really the only thing we need to focus on.
And I think a lot of people, they feel this disconnect personally.
Oh, absolutely.
They say, I'm trying to eat less, I'm exercising more, but I'm just not losing weight. Or I lose the weight and it comes right back.
Right. It's that yo-yo dieting effect that so many people experience.
Yeah, so Dr. Fung talks about proximate versus ultimate causes.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit? He uses the analogy of alcoholism, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a great way to illustrate it. So with alcoholism, the proximate cause is simply that the person drinks too much alcohol.
Right, it's the immediate observable thing.
Exactly. But the ultimate cause is, well, it's much more complex.
Right, it's like, why are they drinking too much?
Exactly. What are the underlying psychological, social, or even biological factors that are driving that behavior?
Mhm.
And Dr. Fung argues that it's the same with weight gain.
Yep.
Yes, in the short term, if you eat more calories than you burn, you're going to gain weight.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't tell us anything about why someone is overeating in the first place.
I see.
Just telling someone to eat less is kind of like telling an alcoholic to just drink less.
Right, it's not addressing the root of the problem.
Exactly. It's overly simplistic, and it ignores the potential for deeper issues that need to be addressed.
And it kind of puts all the blame on the individual,
Isn't
as if
it?
it's just a matter of willpower.
Yeah, and Dr. Fung really pushes back against that notion.
Okay.
He argues that there might be biological factors at play that are making it harder for some people to control their weight. And he even delves into the history of dietary advice.
Oh, yeah, he talks about how this whole low-fat craze wasn't entirely about weight in the beginning.
Right, it was really more about heart health. Back in the 1950s, heart disease was becoming a major concern. And at the time, the thinking, although, as he points out, not entirely based on solid evidence, was that dietary fat was a major contributor to heart problems.
Right.
So there was this big push to reduce fat intake. But here's an interesting point that he brings up.
Okay.
People were also living longer.
Okay.
So they were more likely to develop age-related diseases like heart disease.
So it might have just seemed like there was a sudden increase in heart disease.
Exactly. It might have skewed the perception of how big of a problem it really was.
And what was the result of this focus on cutting fat?
Well, people started replacing fat with carbohydrates in their diets.
And often not the healthiest kinds of carbohydrates.
Right, a lot of refined grains and sugars. So this low-fat, high-carbohydrate shift happened.
Yeah.
And then when people weren't losing weight or weren't seeing the expected health benefits,
Mm-hmm.
the focus shifted again to just counting calories.
Right, like the type of calories didn't matter anymore.
Yeah, it was all about reducing overall calorie intake,
Yeah.
regardless of where those calories were coming from.
And as you said earlier, people are saying, I'm eating less, I'm exercising more, but I'm not losing weight.
Exactly. And Dr. Fung points to the Women's Health Initiative dietary modification trial as a key example of how this approach just doesn't seem to work in the long run for a lot of people.
Can you tell us a bit about that study?
Sure. This was a large and well-designed study that put the eat less, move more strategy to the test.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, the results in terms of sustained weight loss were pretty disappointing.
So it wasn't the magic bullet that people had hoped for?
No, not really.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Dr. Fung explains how our bodies actually fight back when we try to cut calories too drastically.
Yes, this is one of his key points.
He says it's not just about willpower. It's a biological response.
Right, it's like your body has this weight thermostat.
Okay.
And when you suddenly drop your calorie intake way down, your body senses this as a threat.
A threat.
Mm-hmm.
Like it thinks we're starving.
Yeah, like it thinks you're in a famine situation and it needs to conserve energy. So it starts to lower your metabolism, meaning you burn fewer calories at rest.
Wow, so our bodies are working against us.
In a way, yes. And to make matters worse, it also cranks up those hunger signals.
So you're constantly feeling hungry.
Exactly. Your body is trying to get you to eat more and bring your weight back up to what it considers a safe zone. This is all driven by hormones. It's a survival mechanism.
So that feeling of constant hunger, that low energy, always feeling cold when you're on a strict diet,
Right.
those are real physical effects.
Yes, they're not just a sign of weakness or lack of willpower.
And this is kind of what he calls the cruel hoax of calorie restriction.
Yeah, we're led to believe that if we just eat less, we'll lose weight and keep it off.
But our bodies are wired to prevent that from happening.
In a way, yes, at least in the long term.
He also mentions the story of fen-phen.
Oh, right, the weight loss drug that was initially hailed as a miracle solution.
Yeah, but then it turned out to have serious side effects.
Yes, it was eventually linked to heart valve problems and was taken off the market. And this highlights the danger of chasing quick fixes without really understanding the underlying mechanisms involved in weight loss.
All right, so we've talked about calories. Let's move on to exercise.
Okay.
It's the other half of the eat less, move more equation.
Right, the classic advice. But Dr. Fung actually presents some evidence that challenges the idea of exercise as the primary solution to obesity.
Okay, what does he say?
Well, he points out that in some countries like the Netherlands and Italy, where people generally don't exercise as much as we do in the US,
Okay,
they actually have much lower rates of obesity.
interesting.
So that suggests that there's more to the story than just how much we're moving.
He also mentions some data from the American N. Haney survey.
Right, which showed that even though physical activity levels increased in the US between 2001 and 2011,
Okay.
obesity rates continued to rise.
So more exercise didn't equal less obesity.
Right, it didn't translate into the expected outcome.
And this is because calorie expenditure is more complicated than just how much we exercise.
Exactly. It's not just about those dedicated workout sessions. There's also our basal metabolic rate, which is the energy our bodies use just to keep us alive.
Right, like breathing, keeping our heart beating, all that stuff.
Exactly. And then there's the thermic effect of food,
Okay.
which is the calories we burn digesting and processing the food we eat. And then there's something called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT,
Okay.
which is basically all the other movement we do throughout the day.
Like walking around, fidgeting, doing chores.
Yeah, all those little movements add up. And the thing is, all of these factors can change based on a variety of things, including how much we're eating.
So it's not as simple as just adding extra workout to burn more calories.
Right. Our bodies are constantly adapting and adjusting, and Dr. Fung uses a great analogy.
Okay.
He says in Obesity 101, diet is 95% of the grade, and exercise is only 5%.
Wow, that puts it into perspective.
It does, doesn't it? But we often put so much emphasis on exercise for weight loss.
And maybe not enough on the dietary side.
Right. It's about finding the right balance.
He also mentioned some interesting studies on overfeeding.
Oh, yeah, these are fascinating.
What happens when people are deliberately overfed?
Well, in many cases, their bodies actually increase their total energy expenditure to burn off those extra calories.
So their metabolism speeds up.
In a way, yes. And then when the overfeeding period stops, their weight tends to go back to normal.
So it's like their bodies are trying to maintain a certain weight range.
Exactly. It supports the idea that our bodies have a kind of set point.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, the underfeeding studies.
Where people drastically cut calories.
Right. Those often show that metabolism slows down more than expected, which prevents the anticipated weight loss.
Again, pointing to this idea of a set point.
Yes. It's
Right.
like our bodies are resisting those efforts to lose weight.
So if our bodies are trying to maintain a certain weight, and if cutting calories and exercising more doesn't always work to change that set point,
Right.
then what does?
That's the big question. And this brings us to Dr. Fung's main argument.
Okay.
He believes that obesity is primarily a hormonal issue,
Okay.
and that the hormone insulin plays a central role in determining and maintaining that body set weight.
Right. So let's talk about insulin.
Okay.
Most people know it for its role in blood sugar control.
Right. It helps regulate our blood sugar levels.
But how does Dr. Fung connect it to body weight?
Well, he argues that insulin is a powerful signal that tells your body to store fat.
Okay, I'm listening.
So when you eat carbohydrates, they're broken down into glucose.
Glucose is sugar.
Right, and that glucose enters your bloodstream, raising your blood sugar levels. And this triggers your pancreas to release insulin. Insulin's job is to help move that glucose out of the bloodstream and into your cells, either to be used for energy or to be stored. And if there's more glucose than your body needs for immediate energy or to store as glycogen, which is like a short-term storage form of glucose, then your liver steps in and converts that excess glucose into fat.
That's that de novo lipogenesis you mentioned earlier.
Exactly, new fat making. So insulin plays a key role in this whole process of converting and storing energy.
And what evidence does Dr. Fung present to support his claim that insulin is directly linked to weight gain?
He points to studies of diabetic patients
Okay.
who were given either insulin injections or drugs that stimulate insulin production. And what they found was that these patients often gained weight even if they weren't eating more calories overall.
So their calorie intake stayed the same, but they gained weight because of the increased insulin.
Exactly.
That's pretty compelling.
It really suggests that insulin itself is a major driver of fat storage, independent of calorie intake.
And he contrasts this with another type of diabetes drug,
Yeah, the alpha-glucosidase.
inhibitors, right? And those tend to lower insulin levels.
Yeah, even if just slightly. And they're often associated with a small amount of weight loss.
Interesting.
So the pattern is pretty clear.
Okay.
Drugs that raise insulin tend to cause weight gain. Drugs that don't really affect insulin much have a neutral effect on weight. And drugs that lower insulin tend to cause weight loss.
And this seems to happen regardless of their effects on blood sugar.
Exactly. It's not just about blood sugar control. It's about insulin's role in fat storage.
So according to Dr. Fung, high insulin levels are telling our bodies to increase that set point,
Right.
making us feel hungrier
Mm-hmm.
and encouraging more fat storage.
Exactly.
And then, when we try to cut calories while our insulin is still high, our metabolism slows down, making it even harder to lose weight.
It's like a vicious cycle.
It is. All right, but insulin isn't the only hormone at play here.
True.
Dr. Fung also talks about the role of cortisol.
Right, the stress hormone. And as we know, stress is pretty much unavoidable in modern life.
It is. So how does cortisol fit into this weight gain puzzle?
Well, when we're stressed, our bodies release cortisol. And cortisol, among other things, can increase glucose production in the liver.
Okay.
And it can also make our cells more resistant to insulin.
So it's kind of a double whammy.
In a way, yes. It raises blood sugar and makes it harder for insulin to do its job.
And this leads to, what, more fat storage?
Exactly. It creates a perfect storm for weight gain.
He mentioned some studies on prednisone, which is a synthetic form of cortisol.
Right. And those studies show that prednisone can actually increase insulin levels. And conversely, when transplant patients are able to reduce their prednisone dose, they often experience lower insulin levels and weight loss.
Interesting.
And, of course, weight gain is a well-known side effect of prednisone, so that further strengthens the link between excess cortisol and obesity.
He also mentions Cushing's disease, which involves the body producing too much cortisol.
Right. And that's often associated with weight gain and diabetes as well.
Okay, so we've got insulin and cortisol playing key roles here. Now, let's talk about the Atkins diet. It was all about cutting carbs drastically.
Yeah, it was a huge trend for a while.
It was.
Yeah.
So how does Dr. Fung see the rise and fall of the Atkins diet?
Well, he acknowledges that Dr. Atkins' core idea that restricting carbs could lower insulin and lead to weight loss was actually pretty sound.
Okay.
But he also points out that the initial backlash against the Atkins diet from mainstream nutrition authorities was largely based on this fear of fat.
Which we've already talked about might have been misguided.
Right, exactly. And then, of course, there were the early studies that seemed to support the Atkins diet. People were losing weight, and that led to a surge in popularity.
The Atkins onslaught, as he calls it.
Right.
But it wasn't a sustainable solution for everyone, was it?
No, and that's where the longer-term studies came in. Those studies showed that while people often lost weight initially on low-carb diets, many of them ended up regaining the weight, similar to what happened with people on low-fat diets. So it suggested that just focusing on one macronutrient, whether it's fat or carbs, might not be the key to lasting weight loss.
And what does Dr. Fung say about that?
He suggests that while the Atkins diet did address the insulin issue to some extent by cutting carbs,
Okay.
the types of carbs people were still eating and how often they were eating them were still important factors.
So it wasn't just about cutting carbs entirely.
Right. It was more nuanced than that.
Okay, now let's get into what Dr. Fung believes is a really central piece of this whole puzzle.
Okay.
And that's insulin resistance.
Right.
Can you explain what insulin resistance is in simple terms?
Sure. Think of insulin as a key that unlocks the doors to your cells, allowing glucose to enter. Insulin resistance is like those locks have become rusty, or the key doesn't quite fit anymore.
Okay.
Your pancreas is still producing insulin, maybe even more than usual, trying to force those doors open. But your cells aren't responding as well.
So the glucose can't get into the cells as easily.
Exactly. And Dr. Fung argues that this insulin resistance is the root cause of type 2 diabetes.
Not just high blood sugar.
Right. High blood sugar is a symptom, but insulin resistance is the underlying problem. And he uses a great analogy to explain how this resistance develops.
Okay.
He compares it to antibiotic resistance.
Okay.
If you overuse antibiotics, bacteria can adapt and become resistant to their effects.
Right.
Similarly, if your insulin levels are constantly elevated, your cells can become less sensitive to insulin's signals.
I see.
It's like they're getting used to having all that insulin around and they stop responding as effectively.
And he mentions this rare condition called insulinoma.
Yeah, where a tumor produces very high levels of insulin. And what's interesting is that those individuals often develop increased insulin resistance. It's like their bodies are trying to protect themselves from the effects of too much insulin.
Wow, so it's like a built-in safety mechanism.
In a way, yes. And he points out that in type 2 diabetes, giving high doses of insulin to lower blood sugar might actually worsen the underlying insulin resistance over time and contribute to weight gain.
So the treatment might be making the problem worse.
It's a complex issue.
It is. And he emphasizes that it's not just occasional spikes in insulin that cause this resistance.
Right.
It's the constant elevation of insulin.
Exactly. Hormones are usually released in pulses.
Okay.
With periods of lower levels in between. And that helps maintain sensitivity.
But when a hormone like insulin is always high, resistance can develop.
Yes. It's like anything else in life. Too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. And Dr. Fung points to the rise in snacking since the 1970s as a major contributor to this constant insulin exposure.
Snacking, huh? It's funny how snacking has become so normalized.
It has, hasn't it? We're constantly bombarded with messages about healthy snacks.
Right, and it's supposed to be good for our metabolism.
But Dr. Fung disagrees with that.
He does.
He debunks the idea that frequent small meals significantly boost metabolism. He argues that the total number of calories you burn digesting food over a day is probably about the same whether you eat 3 larger meals or 6 smaller ones. So that whole grazing approach might not be as beneficial as we've been led to believe.
And more importantly, from his perspective, it keeps insulin levels elevated for longer periods.
Exactly, and that contributes to insulin resistance.
It's like we're constantly giving our bodies a little sugar rush.
Right, and then another one, and another one.
And our cells are becoming less and less responsive to it.
Exactly, it's a recipe for weight gain and metabolic problems.
Okay, now let's talk about some of the broader social and dietary advice that Dr. Fung questions.
Okay.
I mean, he really challenges a lot of the conventional wisdom.
He does. He's not afraid to shake things up.
So what are some of the things he pushes back against?
Well, he's very critical of the advice to eat 6 small meals a day.
Which is something we've all heard for years.
Right. It's become almost ingrained in our thinking. But he argues that there's really no good evidence to support it.
And he even suggests that there might be financial motivations behind this advice.
Yeah, he points out that the food industry benefits from us eating more often, and that the supplement industry also benefits from us constantly trying to find ways to boost our metabolism.
Interesting.
It's worth considering, isn't it?
It is. It makes you think. And he emphasizes that research actually shows that snacking tends to lead to an overall increase in calorie intake.
It makes sense. The more often you're eating, the more opportunities there are to consume extra calories.
Right. And he advises people to listen to their own bodies when it comes to breakfast.
Yeah, not everyone needs to eat breakfast. And if you do eat breakfast, he says to be careful of those sugary or refined carb-heavy breakfasts.
Like donuts and pastries.
Yeah, things like that, because those can leave you feeling hungry again very quickly.
Right, they cause those big spikes and crashes in blood sugar.
Exactly.
He also brings up the link between poverty and obesity.
Yes, this is an important point. He suggests that the affordability of refined carbohydrates plays a significant role.
Okay,
Well, he explains how government agricultural subsidies in the U.S. often favor crops like corn and wheat,
Okay.
which leads to cheaper refined carb products. So for people who are struggling financially, it's often easier and more affordable to fill up on these less healthy options.
That makes sense.
And he contrasts this with the more gradual increase in fast food consumption,
Okay.
suggesting that fast food alone doesn't fully explain the sharp spike in obesity that began around 1977.
So it's more about the types of foods that have become cheaper and more readily available.
Exactly. It's a complex interplay of factors.
He also uses the example of the Pima Indians.
Right, who experienced a significant increase in weight gain and health problems after switching from their traditional diet of unrefined foods to a Western diet high in refined sugar and flour.
It's a pretty stark reminder of how much our food choices can impact our health.
It is, isn't it? And he even talks about childhood obesity and the potential link to maternal insulin levels during pregnancy.
Wow, that's interesting.
It is, because insulin can cross the placenta.
So a mother's high insulin levels during pregnancy could influence the developing fetus.
Exactly.
He mentioned some studies where traditional low-fat, calorie-restricted diets combined with exercise
Right, the standard advice.
didn't lead to weight loss in children.
Yeah, even when they were following the diet and increasing their activity levels.
So it's not just adults who struggle with these conventional approaches.
No, it seems like they're not very effective for children either.
But he does highlight a study that focused on reducing sugars, starches, and snacking in children.
And that study did show significant weight reduction.
So again, it points to the importance of managing insulin.
Yes, even in young people.
He also notes the correlation between the increase in added sugar consumption after 1977 and the rise in obesity rates.
Right, and then the decrease in both in more recent years.
As people have become more aware of sugar's role.
Exactly. It suggests that our sugar intake is a major driver of this problem.
And it's not a new idea either.
No.
He even quotes Dr. Benjamin Spock from 1946.
Wow, that's going way back. What did Dr. Spock say?
He advised against rich desserts and managing starchy foods for weight control in children.
So this knowledge has been around for a long time.
It has. But it seems like it got lost somewhere along the way.
Yeah, maybe overshadowed by the anti-fat movement.
Okay, let's talk more about the specific effects of fructose.
Okay.
Dr. Fung really highlights fructose as being particularly problematic.
He does. He calls it the bad twin of glucose. And he emphasizes that while there's pretty much universal agreement that sugar is fattening, this message got kind of sidelined by the intense focus on fat after the 1977 dietary guideline.
Right, we talked about that earlier. So what's the problem with fructose?
Well, for one thing, it's metabolized very differently by the liver than glucose is.
Okay.
Glucose can be used by almost every cell in your body for energy, but fructose is primarily processed by the liver. And when we consume a lot of fructose, especially in the form of high fructose corn syrup,
Which has become ubiquitous in processed foods.
exactly, the liver can get overloaded.
Okay.
And this can lead to a buildup of fat in the liver.
Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Right. And this, in turn, can contribute to insulin resistance because a fatty liver is less responsive to insulin signals.
So it's a cascade of negative effects,
It is.
starting with that excess fructose consumption. And he points to the dramatic increase in type 2 diabetes in China.
Right, which has paralleled their increased consumption of sugar.
It's a pretty clear correlation.
It is, and research suggests a strong link between sugar intake, specifically an extra 150 calories of sugar per day,
Okay.
and an increased risk of diabetes.
More so than total calorie intake or other food groups.
Exactly. It seems like sugar has a particularly potent effect on our metabolic health.
And table sugar, sucrose, is made up of half glucose and half fructose.
Right.
So we're getting a dose of fructose every time we eat something with added sugar.
And unfortunately, added sugar is in so many processed foods these days.
It is. It's hard to avoid.
Yeah.
Okay, now what about diet soda?
Ah, the supposed healthy alternative.
Right, it's sugar-free, so it must be fine, right?
Well, Dr. Fung has his doubts.
He does.
He points out that despite the popularity of diet drinks,
Mm-hmm.
obesity and diabetes rates continue to climb.
So it doesn't seem like they're helping much.
No, and he even mentions studies that suggest that artificial sweeteners might actually be associated with weight gain.
Really, that's counterintuitive.
It is, isn't it? But there are a few possible explanations for this.
Okay, like what?
Well, one is that some artificial sweeteners might actually stimulate insulin release, host speaker.